A story worth telling now. Settle in while I tell you something that happened back in the summer of 1880 down in Willow Creek, Texas. My granddaddy knew Tom Wade personal, worked alongside him during harvest season years later. Said Tom was the most decent man he ever met. Though you wouldn't have thought it to look at him that August day. This isn't one of those tall tales cowboys spin around campfires. No, sir. This is about real courage, the kind that doesn't need a gun or a fast horse. It's about two people the world had given up on, who found each other when they had nothing left to lose. My granddaddy always said the best love stories aren't about young folks with their whole lives ahead of them. They're about people who've been knocked down so many times they've lost count, but still get up one more time. That was Tom and Clara. So pour yourself some coffee, and I'll tell you how $4 silver bought something money can't measure. The auctioneer's hammer cracked against pine wood like a rifle shot. 23 souls flinched, 24 if you counted Tom Wade, though he was trying hard to fade into the courthouse wall like old paint. Lord have mercy. It was hot that day. The kind of heat that made the air shimmer and good folks do shameful things. The courthouse square was packed with citizens come to witness Willow Creek's monthly charity auction, though there wasn't much charitable about it. You ask me? Now, folks, the auctioneer mopped his face with a handkerchief that had seen better days. I know this sits uneasy, but the county's got expenses, and these unfortunate souls need placement. Let's proceed with Christian dignity. Tom shifted his weight, feeling those $4 silver in his pocket. They were all that stood between him and being up on that platform himself. He'd been let go from the Brazos Ranch just 3 days prior, too many hands, not enough cattle, the foreman had said. Though Tom reckoned it had more to do with him being a drifter, with no people to vouch for him. Up on the platform stood Clara Hartley, 25 years old, according to the papers. Though she looked older in that worn calico dress she'd mended so many times the original pattern was near about gone. She stood straight as a fence post, hands clutched around a carpet bag that couldn't have weighed more than a newborn calf. Now, you got to understand something about Clara. She was watching that auctioneer's mouth like her life depended on it, which I suppose it did. See, Clara couldn't hear a blessed thing. Born that way, some said. Others claimed it was the fever that took her folks when she was small. Didn't matter much how it happened. What mattered was that she was reading every word that fell from that man's lips. Miss Clara Hartley, the auctioneer read from his ledger, voice carrying across the square like Sunday preaching. 25 years of age, sound of body despite her unfortunate affliction, cannot hear nor speak proper. But she's got 2 good hands and knows domestic work. Tom saw Clara's jaw tighten when the man said, affliction. Her chin lifted a fraction higher. That's when Tom noticed her eyes green as spring grass after rain sweep across the crowd. For just a heartbeat, those eyes locked with his. You know that feeling when you see a horse that's been rode too hard, standing in a pen, waiting to be put down? That mix of pride and defeat that sits in their eyes. That's what Tom saw in Clara's face. And something else too, a fierce determination not to show these people one lick of fear. Who'll start the bidding at $10, the auctioneer called out, trying to sound enthusiastic. $10 for a strong woman who can work dawn to dusk. The silence that followed was thick as molasses. You could hear the flies buzzing around the horses tied at the hitching posts. A woman in the front row, Tom recognized her as Mrs. Pritchard. The deacon's wife whispered to her husband loud enough for half the crowd to hear, who'd want someone who can't even hear when you call for supper or cry out if there's danger. The auctioneer's face went red as a beet. $8 then. Surely Christian charity is worth $8. More silence. Tom watched Clara's eyes moving from face to face in that crowd. She knew exactly what they were thinking. Probably knew better than they did themselves, seeing as how she'd spent her whole life watching folks' faces for the truths they wouldn't say out loud. $5, the auctioneer said, and his voice cracked like a boy's. For the love of all that's holy, $5 for a human being. That's when it happened. The moment my granddaddy said changed everything. Clara's lips started moving. No sound came out, least none that Tom could hear from 30 feet away, but he could read the shape of those words plain as day. No one wants me. A single tear cut through the dust on her cheek. Just one. Then she straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin again, like she was daring that tear to fall. Tom's feet were moving before his brain caught up. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, some folks stepping back like poverty might be catching. He heard someone mutter, "Fool drifter," and someone else say, "Throwing good money after bad." But those voices seemed to come from far away, like they were shouting down a well. By the time Tom reached that platform, his heart was pounding like a smithy's hammer. He looked up at that auctioneer, then real slow and deliberate. He pulled out his 4 silver dollars, set them on the podium one at a time. Each coin rang out in that quiet square like church bells on Easter morning. $4, Tom said, his voice rough from 3 days without talking to anybody but his horse. The auctioneer blinked like he'd been slapped. "Son, the minimum bid is 5. "It's all I got in this world," Tom said, not looking away. "Take it or let her go free." Before we continue, please leave a like and subscribe. Let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. "Now see here, Mr. Wade," the auctioneer started, but Sheriff Daniels stood up from where he'd been leaning against the courthouse wall, tobacco juice staining the dirt where he'd been spitting. "Hutchins," the sheriff said, real quiet-like. "The law says any bid's better than county expense. $4 is legal tender." The auctioneer's mouth opened and closed like a caught fish gasping for air. The whole square had gone so quiet you could hear the blacksmith's hammer ringing 3 streets over. Clara turned to stare at Tom, and Lord, the look on her face like she was trying to figure if he was savior or devil. "Going once," the auctioneer finally managed, voice weak as watered-down coffee. Nobody stirred. A dog scratched behind its ear over by the general store. "Going twice." Mrs. Pritchard made a disgusted sound in her throat, gathered her skirts, and headed for her buggy. That started a general shifting in the crowd, folks remembering they had somewhere else to be. "Sold to Mr. Tom Wade for $4? Tom climbed those platform steps, his boots making hollow sounds on the sun-bleached wood. Up close, he could see things he'd missed from below. Clara's fingernails were bit down to the quick. There was a penny-sized patch on her dress collar where she'd darned a tear with thread that didn't quite match. Her carpetbag had a broken handle mended with what looked like bootlace. The courthouse clerk, a thin fellow with ink stains on his fingers and spectacles perched on his nose, hustled over with papers. "Need your mark here, Mr. Wade, and the ladies too, if she can manage it." Tom signed careful and slow. His handwriting wasn't much, but it was legal. When he handed Clara the pen, she took it without hesitation. The letters she wrote were prettier than anything Tom had seen outside a schoolmarm's copybook. CLARAHARTLEY. Each letter formed perfect as you please. The clerk's eyebrows went up near to his hairline. "Well then," he said, stamping the paper hard enough to make the table jump. "She's your responsibility now, for 1 year's labor, as per the terms." Tom picked up Clara's carpetbag. It weighed about as much as a loaf of bread, everything she owned in the world, lighter than his empty saddlebags. He looked at Clara and jerked his chin toward his wagon, hoping she'd understand. She stood there for a heartbeat, then another. The afternoon sun caught in her dark hair where it had come loose from its pins. Then she walked down those steps with her back straight as a board, not looking at anybody in that crowd. Tom's wagon had seen better decades. One wheel had a wobble he kept meaning to fix, and the bench seat had a crack down the middle that grabbed at your clothes. His mare, Buttercup, named by the previous owner's daughter, not him, stood patient in the heat, tail swishing at flies. Clara climbed up without waiting for help, settling her patched skirts around her with the kind of careful dignity that made Tom's chest tight. He climbed up beside her, gathered the reins. The leather was slick with sweat from his palms. As they rolled down Main Street, Tom could feel every eye following them, the $4 man and the deaf woman nobody wanted. Buttercup's hooves kicked up little clouds of dust that hung in the still air. The wagon wheel squeaked, with each rotation needed greasing. Another thing Tom hadn't had money to fix. Clara sat rigid beside him, hands folded in her lap so tight her knuckles went white. The wagon hit a rut, and her shoulder bumped against his arm. She jerked away like she'd touched a hot stove. Tom kept his eyes forward, pretending not to notice. They passed the last building in town, Murphy's Livery, and Tom finally let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. The road ahead stretched through scrubland. 15 miles to the old Fuller place. 15 miles with a woman who couldn't hear and he couldn't talk to. That's when Tom noticed the clouds building up north, black as fresh tar, stacked high as mountains. Lightning flickered in their bellies. The temperature dropped 5 degrees in the time it took to blink. Buttercup's ears went flat against her head. She knew what was coming, same as Tom did. Clara must have felt the change in the air because she looked where Tom was looking. Her face went pale as flour. She grabbed Tom's arm and pointed ahead at the road, then at the clouds, her meaning clear as spoken words. Between them and shelter lay Willow Creek, in dry weather. It was nothing but a trickle you could step across. But Tom could already hear it, a low rumble like distant thunder that had nothing to do with the storm. Flash flood, and they were heading straight for it. The first fat raindrops hit like somebody was throwing pennies from heaven. Tom snapped the reins, but Buttercup was already moving faster, her instincts better than his judgment. The mare had survived 6 years of Texas weather. She knew what was coming. Clara's hand gripped Tom's arm hard enough to hurt. She pointed at the creek bed ahead, then made a sweeping motion with both hands. Tom understood. The water would rise fast, sweep wide. They had maybe 10 minutes before that trickle turned into a wall of brown water carrying everything in its path. The sky opened up proper then. Not rain exactly, more like somebody had turned over a washtub the size of Texas. Water came down so hard it hurt, drumming on Tom's hat, soaking through his shirt in seconds. Clara hunched forward, trying to shield her face, but there was no hiding from this kind of storm. Buttercup slipped in the sudden mud. The wagon tilted sideways, that bad wheel finally giving up the ghost. Tom heard the wood crack, felt the whole rig lurch. Clara's carpet bag slid across the boards. She lunged for it, caught the broken handle just as it went over the side. The wet leather tore, and the bag disappeared into the brown water, already rushing past the wagon wheels. Everything she owned, gone. Just like that. Tom wrapped the reins around his left fist and reached for Clara with his right, trying to steady her. She was staring at where her bag had vanished, mouth open in what might have been a cry he couldn't hear over the storm's roar. The creek, Lord Almighty. It wasn't a creek anymore. The water rose while Tom watched, brown and angry, carrying branches and tumbleweeds in what looked like part of somebody's chicken coop. A dead mesquite tree came barreling down the current like a battering ram. Tom stood on the wagon bench, measuring the distance. 20 feet of raging water between them and the far bank. The Fuller place sat on high ground beyond. He could just make out that broken chimney through the rain. But 20 feet might as well have been 20 miles with a broke wagon and a spooked horse. Clara tugged his sleeve hard. When he looked down, she was pointing upstream. Tom's stomach dropped clear to his boots. A wall of water was coming, pushing a full-grown cottonwood ahead of it like a toothpick. No time for thinking. Tom grabbed Clara around the waist and jumped. The water hit them like a cold fist. Tom's boots found bottom for half a second before the current yanked his feet out from under him. Clara's weight pulled him sideways. Water went up his nose, down his throat. His shoulder slammed into something hard, a rock or maybe a log. Clara twisted in his arms, her elbow catching his ribs. Tom's hand found her waist again, pulled her tight against him. They broke the surface together, gasping. Clara's hair was plastered across her face like a dark curtain. She clawed it away, eyes wide with the kind of fear that don't need words. Tom's boots found purchase on the creek bottom. The water was up to his chest, to Clara's shoulders. The current tried to pull her away, but Tom locked his arms around her middle, step by step, fighting toward the far bank. Something slammed into Tom's back, a piece of the wagon. Maybe. His knees buckled. Water closed over their heads again. This time Clara didn't fight. She pressed against him, made herself small as possible so he could hold her easier. Smart woman. Even drowning, she was thinking clear. Tom's lungs burned. His boots slipped on the muddy bottom. Then Clara did something that saved them both. She kicked, hard, adding her strength to his. They burst up into the air, Tom's feet finding solid ground. 5 more steps. 3, 2. They crawled up the bank on hands and knees, collapsed in the red mud. Rain hammered down, but at least they could breathe. Tom rolled onto his back, chest heaving like a bellows. Beside him, Clara curled on her side, coughing up creek water. When she finally raised her head, her face was streaked with mud and Lord knows what else. But her eyes were fierce. She made a fist and shook it at the storm, then at the creek that had taken everything. Her mouth moved in what was surely cursing, though Tom was grateful he couldn't hear the words. The Fuller place squatted on the rise above them, about as welcoming as a grave. Half the roof had caved in last winter, and the front door hung on one hinge, but it had walls, most of them, anyway. Tom stood first, legs shaky as a newborn colt's. He offered Clara his hand. She took it. Let him pull her up. Her dress was soaked through, heavy as lead, clinging to her in ways that weren't proper to notice. Tom shrugged out of his jacket, wet as it was, and held it out to her. Clara looked at the jacket, then at him. Something passed across her face, soft and quick as a bird's shadow. She took the jacket, pulled it on. It hung past her hands, but she clutched it closed at the throat. They trudged up the hill, slipping in the mud. The rain had eased to a steady patter, but the wind picked up cold. By the time they reached the house, Tom's teeth were chattering like castanets. The door took both of them to open, swollen wood scraping against the floor. Inside was dark as a cave, smelling of pack rats and mold, but the main room's roof held, mostly. Water dripped through in one corner, but the rest stayed dry. Tom felt his way along the wall until his fingers found the stone fireplace. There, on the mantel, right where the Fullers must have left it, a tin box. He pried it open, matches wrapped in oilcloth. And miracle of miracles, they were dry. Next to them, a stub of candle. The match flared. Tom touched it to the candle wick. Light pushed back the dark, showing a room that had seen better days. A broken table, 2 chairs that might hold weight, an iron stove with no door. Through a doorway, another room smaller, with a bed frame, but no mattress, just rope supports gone slack with age. Tom set the candle on the table and turned to Clara. She stood dripping in the doorway, his jacket still clutched around her. In the candlelight, he could see her shivering. They needed to get warm, get dry, or the fever would take them both. Tom pointed at the back room, then at Clara, made a sleeping motion with his hands against his cheek, then pointed at himself, at the main room floor. She'd take the bed frame, such as it was. He'd make do out here. Clara walked to the back room, looked in, came back. She pointed at Tom, then at the doorway of the small room, then at herself, then at the far corner of the same room. Her meaning was clear. They could share the space, with distance between them. Tom shook his head firm, pointed again at the main room floor. His mama had raised him proper. You don't share sleeping quarters with a woman you're not married to, no matter the circumstances. Clara's jaw set stubborn. She walked to the broken stove, felt the iron, cold as winter, no wood, no way to make heat. She wrapped her arms around herself, an exaggerated shiver, then pointed at Tom. Her logic was plain separate rooms meant freezing. This wasn't about propriety. It was about surviving the night. Tom knew she was right. Already his wet clothes felt like ice against his skin. The temperature was dropping fast, the way it does after storms. They had one candle, no blankets, no dry clothes, no food, nothing but walls and a roof that mostly didn't leak. A scratching sound came from above. Tom looked up. In the corner where the roof leaked, he saw the ceiling boards bow slightly. Dust sifted down between the cracks. Clara couldn't hear it, but she saw Tom's face change, saw him staring up at those sagging boards. She followed his gaze just as something moved up there. something bigger than a pack rat. Something that made those old boards creak and groan. The candle flame danced in a sudden draft, and through the gap in the ceiling boards, a pair of eyes reflected the light yellow as brass buttons, and definitely not human. The eyes blinked. A masked face pushed through the gap raccoon, big female by the size of her, behind her. Smaller shadows shifted and chittered. Babies, probably born in the spring. Tom's shoulders dropped like somebody had cut his strings. He pointed up at the ceiling, made a motion with his hands like little paws washing. Clara tilted her head, not understanding. Tom picked up a piece of kindling from beside the fireplace, tapped the ceiling gentle-like. The raccoon vanished quick as smoke, her babies scrambling after. Their claws skittered across the boards toward the far wall, then silence. Clara's mouth twitched at the corners, not quite a smile, but close. She walked to the back room, and Tom heard wet fabric hitting the floor. His face went hot as a griddle. He turned his back, stared hard at that candle flame while rustling sounds came from the other room. When Clara came back out, she'd wrapped herself in her wet dress like some kind of blanket. Everything still proper, but arranged for warmth instead of fashion. She pointed at Tom's soaked shirt, then at the window where they could hang things to dry. Tom peeled off his shirt, wrung it out. Water pattered on the floor. His skin prickled with goosebumps in the cold air. Clara had found some bent nails in the wall, was already hanging her underthings practical cotton, nothing fancy, the kind any decent woman would wear. Tom kept his eyes elsewhere, hung his shirt on another nail. His pants would have to stay on, wet or not. A man had limits. Clara went to the back room, came back dragging the rope bed frame. She positioned it in the corner of the main room, far from where the roof leaked. Then she pointed at Tom, at herself, at opposite corners of the room. They could share the space but keep proper distance. The candle burned lower while they arranged things. No blankets, no pillows, just hard floor and whatever they could fashion from their wet clothes. Tom's stomach cramped, hard enough to double him over. When had he last eaten yesterday morning cold biscuits and coffee thin as dishwater? Clara must have been hungry too, but she just sat in her corner, arms wrapped around her knees. The candlelight caught in her wet hair, made it shine like polished wood. She was watching Tom with those green eyes, studying him like she was trying to read his character in the set of his shoulders, the way he held his hands. Tom sat against his wall. The floor was hard as dried clay, cold seeping through his wet pants. They watched each other across that flickering candle. No way to talk in the dark. No paper, no chalk, nothing but silence and the sound of rain easing off outside. That's when Clara did something that surprised Tom down to his boots. She stood, went to the corner where her carpet bag would have sat if it hadn't washed away. But there was something there, a small cloth bundle she must have been carrying inside her dress when the flood hit. How she'd kept hold of it through all that water, Tom couldn't figure. She opened it careful as if it held gold coins. Inside 3 strips of jerked beef, hard as leather. A handful of crackers wrapped in what looked like a page from a Montgomery Ward catalog. And at the bottom, dried apple rings, brown and wrinkled but still sweet-smelling. Clara divided everything with the precision of a banker counting money. Half for her, half for Tom. She pushed his portion across the floor, then sat back to watch him eat. The jerky took forever to chew, salty enough to make Tom's mouth water painful-like, but it was food. Real food. And his stomach welcomed it like a long-lost friend. The crackers had gone soft from the rain, but he ate every crumb. The apple rings tasted like sunshine and better days. Clara ate like a bird, tiny bites, making it last. When she finished, she folded that cloth into a perfect square, tucked it beside her. The candle was just a stub now, maybe 20 minutes of light left. Tom's eyes kept trying to close. His body ached from the flood, from the long walk in mud, from sleeping rough the past 3 nights. Clara looked tired too, that kind of bone-deep weary that comes from fighting for your life. She pointed at the candle, made a sleeping motion with her hands. Tom nodded. They needed to save those matches for real emergencies. He blew out the flame. darkness complete as the inside of a grave. Tom heard Clara shifting, trying to find comfort on that hard floor. His own back already ached something fierce. The wet pants clung to his legs like they were painted on, cold and miserable. Something touched his hand in the dark Clara's fingers. Just for a second. A squeeze that might have meant, "Thank you," or "We survived," or "Tomorrow will be better." Then she was gone, back to her corner. Tom must have slept, though he didn't remember closing his eyes. Gray light woke him, seeping through the cracked window like watered milk. His neck had a crick that ran clear down to his shoulder blade. His pants had dried stiff as boards. Clara was already up, standing at the window. She'd put her dress back on proper, though it was wrinkled as a washboard and stained with mud. Her hair was twisted up with what looked like a piece of wire she'd found somewhere. When she heard him stirring, felt the vibration through the floor. Maybe she turned in the morning light. Tom could see her face clear, exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes like charcoal smudges. But there was something else there too, a kind of determination that reminded Tom of his mama, the way she'd looked that last winter when the food ran out, but she kept finding ways to feed them anyway. Clara pointed outside. Tom looked where she was pointing and nearly shouted with relief. Buttercup stood in the yard, head down, munching on the tall grass. The mare had found her way here in the night, probably following the high ground. Her saddle was gone and she had cuts on her legs from the flood debris, but she was alive and whole. Clara smiled then, a real smile that changed her whole face. Made her look younger, softer, like the girl she might have been if life had dealt her better cards. She touched Tom's arm, pointed at the horse, then at her heart. Her meaning was clear. The horse gave them hope. With Buttercup, they could get to town, find work, maybe earn enough to eat regular. Tom went outside, moving slow so as not to spook the mare. She lifted her head, nickered soft when she saw him. Let him run his hands down her legs, checking those cuts. Nothing too deep, though one on her right foreleg would need watching. Clara came out with a bucket rusty and dented but still sound that she'd found Lord knows where. She pointed at the well in the yard. Tom had missed it yesterday in the storm. But there it was, stone-lined and proper. The windlass was broken, but the rope was still good. Tom worked the rope hand over hand, hauling up water, brown at first, then clearer. Clara held the bucket steady while he poured. Buttercup drank deep, water dribbling from her muzzle. That's when Tom noticed what Clara had found while he'd been sleeping. Behind the house, partially collapsed but still recognizable, a chicken coop. The roof had caved in on one side, and the wire was torn. But the frame stood solid, inside. Nesting boxes lined one wall, filled with old straw and mouse droppings. Clara was already pulling at the broken boards, sorting the good wood from the rotten. She'd found a hammer somewhere rusty but serviceable and was pulling nails from the boards, straightening the bent ones against a rock. They worked without trying to talk, finding a natural rhythm. Tom pulled boards loose. Clara cleaned and sorted nails. Tom held beams in place. Clara steadied them while he hammered. The sun climbed higher, warming Tom's back through his shirt. Sweat started running down his spine. But it was good sweat, working sweat. They'd been at it maybe 2 hours when Tom lifted a corner beam to reset it. The wood looked solid enough from the outside, but when his full weight hit it, he felt it give, soft inside, rotted through. The beam started to crack with a sound like bones breaking. Clara saw it happening. Her eyes went wide as dinner plates. She grabbed her apron, started waving it over her head like a surrender flag. Tom didn't understand what she was trying to tell him. She pointed up, frantic-like, jabbing her finger at the air above his head. Tom looked up just as the whole roof structure started to sway. The beam he was holding it was the main support. If it went, everything above would come down like dominoes. The weight pressed down on his shoulders. His arms shook with the strain. Clara dropped the hammer and ran. Tom's muscles burned like fire as the beam bent more, making a sound like green wood in a fire. She grabbed the broken hoe handle they'd been using as a pry bar,
jammed it under the sagging section of roof. The handle bowed but held. Tom's arm shook bad enough his teeth rattled. Clara vanished into the house. Tom's knees wanted to buckle. The sun beat down on his neck, and black spots danced at the edges of his vision. Just hold on. Hold on. Clara came running back with the iron stove door, the one that had been missing from the stove inside. She wedged it right under the beam where the rot was worst, making a kind of metal brace. Then she grabbed Tom's shirt with both hands and pulled. He let go, stumbled backward. The beam held, supported by their makeshift props. Tom's legs gave out. His knees hit the dirt hard. The ground tilted sideways, or maybe he was tilting. Hard to tell. Clara's face appeared in front of him, wavering like he was looking at her through heat shimmer. Her mouth was moving, probably asking if he was all right. Tom tried to nod, but his head felt like it weighed 100 pounds. The black spots got bigger. Tom put out a hand to steady himself, missed the ground somehow. His palm scraped across dirt and gravel. Clara's hands grabbed at his shoulders, trying to hold him up, but Tom outweighed her by a good 70 pounds. He went down sideways, shoulder hitting first. The impact knocked the wind out of him. Clara's boots appeared next to his face, worn leather with that slit in the sole where she'd hidden her money. She was pulling at him, trying to get him up. Tom wanted to help, but his arms wouldn't work right. The sun pressed down like a flat iron. Tom's shirt was soaked through with sweat, but his teeth started chattering, hot and cold at the same time. That wasn't good. He'd seen men get like this in the summer heat, working cattle. Heat stroke. They called it, or heat exhaustion. Either way, it could kill you dead as a bullet. Clara managed to get him half sitting, his back against the chicken coop wall. She ran for the water bucket. Tom watched her through eyes that wouldn't quite focus. She moved funny, like she was underwater. Cold water splashed on his face, down his neck. Tom gasped, lungs pulling in air like he'd been drowning. More water over his head. It helped some. Cleared his vision enough to see Clara's face proper. She was scared. Really scared. The kind of fear that makes people do things they never thought they could. She pulled at his arm, trying to get him up. Tom pushed with his legs, Clara taking as much of his weight as she could manage. They made it 3 steps before Tom's knees buckled again. This time Clara couldn't hold him. They both went down, Tom on his hands and knees. Clara sprawled beside him. She scrambled up, hooked her arms under his, and started dragging. Tom's boot heels left grooves in the dirt. His shirt rode up, and he felt sharp stones scraping his back. The house doorway seemed a mile away. Somehow Clara got him inside, into the back room where it was cooler, darker. Tom collapsed on the floor, cheek pressed against the rough boards. They smelled of dust and mouse droppings. But he didn't care. The room spun lazy circles around him. Clara's hands worked at his shirt buttons. Tom tried to help, but his fingers felt thick as sausages. Useless. She got the shirt off, used it to wipe his face. The cloth came away soaking wet. She ran out, came back with the water bucket, poured the rest over Tom's head and chest. His teeth chattered harder. That didn't make sense. He was burning up, but freezing too. Clara's hand pressed against his forehead, and Tom saw her eyes go wider. Her palm felt like ice against his skin. She stood there for a heartbeat, looking down at him. Then she ran out of the room. Tom heard her footsteps on the porch, then nothing. Where was she going? His thoughts moved like cold molasses, couldn't quite connect. Horse hooves. That was Buttercup's gait. He'd know it anywhere. But too fast, too hard. Clara didn't know how to ride, did she? The sound faded quick. She was leaving. Tom tried to call out, but his throat felt swollen shut. Time went strange after that. The room got dark, then light, then dark again. Or maybe Tom's eyes were closing. Hard to tell. The raccoon scratched overhead. Tom's mother stood in the corner, which couldn't be right because she'd been dead 5 years. She was saying something about keeping warm, about not giving up. Voices. Real voices. Not fever dreams. A man's deep tone. How long has he been like this? Tom forced his eyes open. Dr. Morrison knelt beside him, graybeard, black bag, hands that knew their business. Behind him stood Clara, her hair wild, dressed dusty like she'd ridden hard, her chest heaved like she'd been running. "High fever," the doctor said, but he was looking at Clara, speaking slow and clear so she could read his lips. "When did it start?" Clara held up fingers. Tom couldn't make out how many. Everything kept sliding sideways. Dr. Morrison opened his bag, pulled out a brown bottle. "Can you understand me?" he asked Clara. She nodded quick. "Good. This is willow bark extract. Make a tea, 1 spoonful to a cup of hot water, every 2 hours. He showed her with his hands 1 spoon. Pour water. Stir. Clara nodded again, took the bottle careful-like. Cool water on his skin. Keep the fever down. The doctor demonstrated, pretending to wring out a cloth. If he won't drink, wet his lips. Small sips. Clara was already moving. Getting the bucket. The doctor felt Tom's pulse, looked at his eyes. You're lucky she came for you, he told Tom, though Tom wasn't sure he was really talking to him. That girl rode into town like the devil was chasing her, and then the doctor turned to Clara. How did you make them understand you spoke? Didn't you? Clara nodded. She touched her throat, then her mouth, and Tom saw her lips form a word. Yes. First time in how long? Clara held up 2 fingers. 2 years. Dr. Morrison shook his head. You hadn't spoken in 2 years, but you did it for him. He pulled something from his vest pocket, a folded paper. This is from Mrs. Morrison, my wife's cousin in Dallas, Mrs. Sarah Hartley. Says you worked for her 3 years. Says you were the best help she ever had. Learned everything she taught about nursing and more. Clara took the letter, but her eyes stayed on Tom. You know what to do, the doctor said. Cool water, willow bark tea. Watch for the fever to break. If it doesn't by morning, send for me, though I have a feeling you won't need to. He looked around the bare room. You have food. Clara shook her head. The doctor reached into his pocket again, pulled out a silver dollar. Clara's hands went up, shaking her head fierce. The doctor pressed the coin into her palm anyway, closed her fingers around it. For nursing work, he said firmly. You'll earn it tonight, I promise you that. He gathered his bag, stood with a grunt old knees. Tom could hear them pop. That was brave, what you did. Riding to town alone, speaking up. People heard you. They're talking. Clara's jaw tightened, but she didn't look away. They're saying maybe they were wrong about some things, the doctor added. Then he was gone, boot steps fading on the porch. Clara stood there holding that silver dollar like it might disappear. Her shoulders started shaking. Just once, hard, like she was shaking something off. Then she turned to Tom. All business. The first spoonful of willow bark tea tasted bitter as sin. Tom's stomach cramped, wanted to throw it back up. Clara held his head steady, gave him another spoonful, and another, patient as Job, even when half of it dribbled down his chin. She tore a strip from her petticoat. Tom was too sick to be embarrassed about seeing her underthings, soaked it in water, laid it across his forehead. The cool helped some. When that cloth got warm, she changed it for another. Dark came. Clara lit their one candle, set it where she could see his face. The fever spiked higher. Tom kicked at things that weren't there, mumbled about cattle prices in his mother's garden. Clara held him down when he thrashed, her whole weight across his chest. His mother stood in the corner again, holding out her hand. She looked so real, so solid. Tom reached for her. Clara caught his hand, pressed it to her own cheek. Her skin felt cool, real, alive, an anchor to the world. Tom focused on that touch while the fever tried to pull him under. More water, more tea. Clara never stopped moving. When Tom shivered, she lay her body across his for warmth. When he burned, she bathed him with wet cloths. No modesty left between them now, just the practical business of staying alive. The candle burned down to nothing. Clara lit the last match, their last candle, in the new light. Tom saw her face clear for a second, beyond tired, beyond scared, but not giving up. She leaned close, and Tom felt her breath on his ear. She was trying to talk again, forcing out words that came rough and broken. Stay, please, stay. Tom's eyes opened to morning light. His shirt was soaked through with sweat, but his head felt clear for the first time in how long? A day too. Clara slumped against the wall beside him, still holding a damp cloth. Her fingers had gone slack in sleep, but even unconscious, she hadn't let go. Her dress was wrinkled beyond saving, stained with dirt and Tom's sweat and Lord knows what else. Dark circles under her eyes looked like bruises. She'd been up all night, maybe longer, fighting his fever. Tom tried to sit up. His muscles felt like water, but he managed to prop himself on one elbow. The movement made Clara's eyes snap open. She dropped the cloth, hands going to his face, checking his temperature. Her whole body sagged with relief when she felt cool skin. She tried to stand, stumbled. Tom caught her wrist. She'd worn herself to nothing taking care of him. Her hands shook as she pointed at the stove in the main room, made eating motions. Food. She'd bought food with the doctor's dollar. Tom could smell it now, beans cooking, coffee boiling. His stomach cramped with a different kind of pain. Good pain. Hungry pain. Clara helped him to his feet. Tom's legs held. Barely. They made it to the main room, where Clara had set up a kind of kitchen on the broken table. One bowl, one cup, both cracked but serviceable. She'd found them somewhere, probably buried in the debris outside. The beans were thin, more water than substance, but they tasted like a feast. Clara fed him first, careful spoonfuls, watching to make sure he kept it down. The coffee was strong enough to float a horseshoe, just the way Tom liked it, when he'd eaten his share. Clara wolfed down hers like she hadn't eaten in days. Probably hadn't. Not proper anyway. Tom heard horses outside, not one horse, several. Clara heard nothing, but she saw his face change. She went to the window, and her whole body went rigid. 3 women climbed down from a wagon, Mrs. Morrison in the lead, black dress buttoned up to her throat despite the morning heat. Behind her, Mrs. Baker carrying a basket, and Margaret Fuller, whose family had owned this place before the bank took it. Clara's hands moved quick, trying to smooth her ruined dress, fix her hair. No use. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who'd spent days nursing a sick man with no supplies and no help. The door opened without a knock. Mrs. Morrison's eyes took in everything: Tom's still shirtless, still weak, Clara's disheveled state, the single room they'd obviously been sharing. "Well," Mrs. Morrison said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, "this is worse than I thought."
Clara stepped between Tom and the women, chin up. Tom recognized that stance, same as when she'd faced the auction crowd, ready to fight. "Dr. Morrison said the girl could nurse," Mrs. Morrison continued, talking slow so Clara could read her lips. "Didn't say she was warming your bed too." Tom found his voice, though it came out rough as sandpaper. "Now wait just a minute. Don't you dare defend this impropriety. Mr. Wade." Mrs. Morrison's face had gone red as a turkey's waddle. "This girl can't speak for herself, can't hear what people are saying about her reputation." Clara slapped the wall hard. The sound made everyone jump. When they looked, she stood by the table where Tom's wet shirt still hung from yesterday, or was it 2 days ago? Clara pointed at it, then at the water bucket, then at the medicine bottle. Her meaning was clear: she'd been nursing. Nothing more. "Doesn't matter what you were doing," Mrs. Morrison said. "What matters is what people think. And right now, they think you're living in sin." Mrs. Baker set down her basket. Tom could smell cornbread, and his mouth watered something fierce. "Sarah, maybe we should..." "Should what?" "Pretend this is acceptable." Mrs. Morrison's voice climbed higher. "That poor girl needs protection. She needs proper placement with a decent family." Clara's hands started moving fast, gesturing at the house, at Tom, at the work they'd started outside. Nobody understood her signs, but the feeling behind them was clear as spring water. Margaret Fuller spoke up then, quiet but firm. "This was my family's place for 10 years. We built that chicken coop Tom was fixing. We dug that well." She looked around the bare room. "It's good to see someone trying to make it live again." "That's not the point." "Isn't it?" Margaret faced Mrs. Morrison square. They're trying to build something, same as we all did when we came here. Mrs. Morrison's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. She looked at Clara, who stood straight-backed, waiting. Then she said the words that changed everything. 2 weeks. You have 2 weeks to make this proper. Marriage or separation. Choose. She swept out, skirts rustling like angry geese. Mrs. Baker followed, but she left the basket. Margaret lingered by the door. My husband always said this land had good soil, she said, looking directly at Clara. Just needs the right seeds and someone willing to work it. She pulled a cloth bag from her pocket. These are from my garden. Beans, corn, squash. Plant them when you're ready. After they left, Clara sank into the one chair. Her hands shook as she picked up a piece of charcoal from the stove, found a flat board to write on. Tom had to lean close to read her shaky letters. 2 weeks. Tom took the charcoal. His own hand wasn't much steadier. Don't have to. Your choice. Clara erased it with her sleeve. Wrote, want to stay. Not if forced. She looked at him for a long moment, then wrote, not forced, choosing. Tom's chest went tight. He wrote, why, instead of writing. Clara stood and walked to his coat hanging on a nail. From the inside pocket, she pulled out something wrapped in oilcloth. Tom's mother's seed packets. He'd forgotten about them, but Clara hadn't. She'd seen them that first day, maybe, or found them when she was tending him. She laid them out careful on the table. 5 packets, each one labeled in his mother's careful hand. Sweet corn, Mary Wade, 1875. Pole beans, Mary Wade, 1876. Tomatoes, Mary Wade, 1874. And the flowers, Morning Glory, Mary Wade, 1873. Sunflower, Mary Wade, 1875. Clara picked up the charcoal again. Your mother's. Tom nodded, throat too thick to speak. Why never plant? Tom took the charcoal. No place worth planting. Clara walked to the window. Outside. The plot of land she'd started clearing that first day stretched maybe 20 feet square. Not much, but it was level ground with good drainage. She turned back to Tom, picked up the seeds, held them gentle as baby birds. Her message was clear: this place was worth planting. She wrote something else. Need more than 2 weeks' worth. Tom frowned, not understanding. Clara drew on the board 2 stick figures, a house, a garden. Then she added a simple sum, $200. The land. If they were going to stay, really stay, they'd need to buy it from whoever held the deed now. $200 might as well be $2,000. Clara walked to that same corner where her carpet bag had been. She knelt, pried up a floorboard Tom hadn't even noticed was loose. From underneath, she pulled an oilcloth bundle, unwrapped it slow and careful. Money, paper bills, worn soft but real. She counted them out on the table, lips moving silently. 50, 70, 100, 120, 140, 150. Tom stared. A fortune. Clara wrote 3 years, Mrs. Morrison's cousin. Saved everything. $150. Still 50 short of buying the land, but it was more than most people saw in a lifetime. Clara looked at the money, then at Tom, then wrote, trust me, before Tom could answer. Hoofbeats sounded outside. Single rider, coming fast. Tom recognized the horse banker Hutchins Bay gelding. But it was Johnny Hutchins riding, the banker's son, face flushed with excitement or fear. He didn't knock, just burst through the door. Mr. Wade, you gotta come quick. Pa sent me. There's trouble. Clara couldn't hear, but she could see the boy's panic. Tom grabbed his shirt, still damp. What kind of trouble? The land? This land? Someone's making an offer? Cash offer? Today? Tom's stomach dropped. Clara must have understood from their faces because she grabbed Tom's arm, her fingers digging in hard. Johnny kept talking, words tumbling over each other. Pa said if you want a counteroffer, you got 1 hour, maybe less. Johnny's horse was still breathing hard, foam around its bit. The boy stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking from Tom to Clara and back again. 1 hour, Tom's voice came out like gravel. The banker gave us 2 weeks, said so himself. That was before. Johnny shifted his weight, boots scraping the floor. Man from Dallas showed up this morning. Has the cash in hand. $200, right there on Pa's desk. Clara grabbed the charcoal, wrote fast. What man? Johnny read it, looked surprised she could write. Mr. Thornton says he knew the Fullers, wants to ranch it. Tom knew that name. Thornton ran cattle down near Austin, had money to burn. If he wanted this land, he'd get it. Clara was already moving. She swept her money off the table into the oilcloth, wrapped it tight, pointed at Tom, at herself, at the door. They were going to town. Now. Wait. Tom caught her arm. We only have 150. He's got 200. Clara wrote on the board, ask for time. Thornton won't wait. Man like that doesn't need to. Clara's jaw set stubborn. She erased the board. Wrote, we try. Johnny cleared his throat. Pa said to tell you something else. Said Thornton doesn't know anybody's living here. Thinks it's still abandoned. If he knew you'd fixed it up some, might change things. Tom looked around the bare room. Fixed up the roof leaked. The door hung crooked. They didn't even have a proper bed. But Clara was already pulling on her muddy boots, pinning up her hair with that piece of wire. Can you ride double? Tom asked Johnny. My horse can't carry us both to town. Not fast enough. Johnny nodded. My horse is strong. They went outside, Tom's legs still shaky from the fever. Buttercup stood in the shade, tail swishing. No way she could make the fast run to town. Not after what she'd been through. Tom helped Clara up behind Johnny. She'd never ridden astride before, proper ladies rode side saddle, but there was no time for proper now. Her dress hiked up, showing her ankles and a good bit of calf. She pressed against Johnny's back, arms tight around his waist. The boy's ears went red as sunset. Tom hauled himself up on Buttercup. His head spun for a second, black spots dancing. Clara saw, reached out like she might get down, come to him. Tom waved her off. They had less than an hour now. The ride to town was torture. Johnny's horse kicked up dust that Buttercup ran through, coating Tom's throat. His fever-weak body screamed with each jolt. Sweat ran down his back, soaking through the shirt he'd barely had time to button. Town appeared through the heat shimmer. The bank sat on Main Street, brick building with real glass windows. Tom could see a fancy carriage out front had to be Thornton's. They tied up the horses. Clara slid down, tried to smooth her dress. Useless. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who'd been through flood, fever, and hell. But her chin stayed high as they pushed through the bank's door. Hutchins sat behind his massive oak desk, across from him, a man in a black suit that probably cost more than Tom had made in his whole life. Thornton. Had to be. Smooth face, soft hands, the kind of man who hired other men to do his sweating. Mr. Wade. Hutchins stood, surprise clear on his face. And Miss Hartley. We weren't expecting. Heard there's an offer on the Fuller place, Tom said. Thornton turned in his chair, looked them up and down like they were cattle at auction. And you are Tom Wade. This is Clara Hartley. We're living there. Squatting, you mean? Thornton's voice was smooth as oil. On property you don't own. We're fixing it up, Tom said, cleaning the well, repairing the chicken coop. Chicken coop, Thornton laughed, a sound with no humor in it. I'm running cattle. Mr. Wade, don't need chicken coops. Clara stepped forward, pulled out her oilcloth bundle, set it on Hutchins' desk, unwrapped it careful. The bills lay there, soft and worn. She looked at Hutchins, then wrote on a piece of paper from his desk, $150. Thornton laughed again. I have 200, cash, right now. Clara wrote, give us 2 weeks, we'll match it. Why would I wait 2 weeks for what I can have today? Tom watched Clara's face. She was thinking hard, that little line appearing between her eyebrows. Then she wrote something else, showed it to Thornton, because we'll make it worth 300. Tom's heart near stopped. 300, they barely had 150. Thornton leaned forward. You don't have $300, Clara wrote. 2 weeks, 300, or we leave. And if you can't pay, Clara looked at Tom, then wrote, then we leave and you pay nothing. Bank keeps our deposit. Hutchins cleared his throat.
Miss Hartley, that's not how. Clara slapped her money on the desk. $150. Probably every cent she'd saved in her whole life. She pointed at it, then at Hutchins. Then wrote, "Hold this. Good faith." Thornton stood, walked to the window. Tom could see him calculating. If they failed, he got the land for the original 200. If they succeeded well, he'd have to pay more. But the land would be improved, cleaned up, already partially repaired. 1 week, Thornton said. Not 2. Clara shook her head, held up 2 fingers. 10 days, Clara wrote. 2 weeks or no deal. Thornton turned to Hutchins. Is this legal? Can she even enter into contracts? Tom stepped forward. She can read, write, and count better than most men. That's legal enough. But she can't speak for herself. That's when Clara did something that shocked everyone in that room. She opened her mouth and forced out words, rough and broken but clear. I speak. Now, the room went dead quiet. Even Thornton looked stunned. Clara pointed at herself, then at the money, then at Thornton. Her meaning was clear. She was speaking for herself, making her own deal. Hutchins found his voice first. Mr. Thornton, the law's clear.
She's demonstrated mental competence. The deal's legal if you accept it. Thornton looked at Clara, really looked at her for the first time. Saw past the muddy dress and tired eyes to the steel underneath. 2 weeks, $300. But if you're $1 short, the land's mine for the original 200. Clara nodded, held out her hand to shake. Thornton hesitated. Men didn't shake hands with women, but Clara kept her hand out, steady and waiting. Finally, he took it. One firm shake. Mr. Hutchins, hold her money, Thornton said, and draw up the papers. While Hutchins wrote, Clara leaned against the wall. Tom could see her shaking, just little trembles in her hands and shoulders. Speaking those 3 words had cost her, maybe more than the money. Outside the bank, Thornton climbed into his fancy carriage. 2 weeks, Mr. Wade, not a day more. He tapped his driver's shoulder, and they rolled away. Tom turned to Clara. $300. We need to earn $150 in 2 weeks. That's impossible. Clara wrote on the last piece of paper she'd taken from the bank. Not impossible. Hard. There's not enough work in the whole county. Clara grabbed his arm, pointed down Main Street. The church sat at the far end, white steeple reaching toward heaven. She wrote, Sunday, church social. Tom understood then. Tomorrow was Sunday. The whole town would gather. If they were going to find work, earn money, it would have to start there. They walked toward the horses, Clara's hand on Tom's arm to steady him or maybe to steady herself. As they reached Buttercup, Clara stopped. She was looking at something in the general store window. White fabric. A whole bolt of it. Clean and simple. The kind women used for wedding dresses when they couldn't afford silk. The price tag read $10. Clara stared at that fabric like it held all the answers. Then she turned to Tom and wrote in the dust on the store window, If we get married, women will hire me. Tom's chest went tight. She was right. A married woman was respectable. A married woman could take in sewing, do laundry, all kinds of work that nobody would give to a woman living in sin. Clara wiped the window clean with her sleeve. Wrote again. Your choice, too. The church bell rang out across Willow Creek, 3 long pulls that Tom felt in his chest. Sunday morning, and half the town was already gathering. Wagons and buggies crowded the yard, horses tied to every available post and tree. Tom's good shirt, his only shirt, now still showed water stains from the flood. Clara had tried to iron it with a hot rock from the fire, but the wrinkles stayed stubborn. She'd done better with her own dress, somehow making that worn calico look almost respectable. Her hair was pinned up proper, not with wire this time, but with 2 pins she'd found in a crack in the floorboards. They stood at the church steps, neither moving. Tom could feel eyes on them from every direction. Whispers carried on the morning air not the words, but the tone. Disapproval, curiosity, judgment. Clara's fingers dug into his arm. Her chin went up, same as at the auction. They climbed those steps together, inside. Pine pews gleamed with beeswax polish. Families sat in their usual spots, same as they'd been sitting for years. The Brady family on the left, all 7 kids scrubbed clean, the Mitchells on the right, the old man already dozing. Empty spots here and there where folks were still coming in. Tom guided Clara to the back pew. A family already sitting there, the Carsons got up and moved across the aisle. Mrs. Carson pulled her daughter close, like poverty might be catching. Reverend Walsh climbed the pulpit, old knees creaking loud enough to hear 3 pews back. He opened his Bible, cleared his throat, started talking about good Samaritans, about helping neighbors in need. Tom tried to focus, but his mind kept running numbers. $150 in 14 days, $10 a day, every day, no rest.
Clara watched the Reverend's lips, following every word. Her hand rested on Tom's arm, and he could feel her pulse through the fabric. Quick, nervous. When the congregation stood to sing, she stood too, mouth moving along with the hymn she couldn't hear. The service ended with another bell ring. People filed out toward the social hall behind the church. Tables were already set with covered dishes, the smell of fried chicken and fresh bread making Tom's stomach clench. They'd eaten the last of Margaret Fuller's cornbread for breakfast. Clara pulled him toward a corner of the hall. From inside her dress, Tom didn't want to know how she'd hidden it there. She pulled out a small bundle, needle, thread, and a piece of fine linen no bigger than a handkerchief. She spread them on the corner of an empty table. People noticed. How could they not? The deaf woman setting up shop at their social? Like she had any right to be there. Clara threaded her needle without looking. Muscle memory from 3 years of sewing. Then she started to work. Tom had never really watched her sew before. Her fingers moved faster than his eyes could follow. The needle flashed in the light from the windows, in and out, creating tiny, perfect stitches. Within minutes, she'd embroidered a rose on that linen. Not just any rose petals that looked soft enough to touch. Leaves with actual veins, thorns sharp enough to draw blood. All done with plain white thread, using nothing but the texture of the stitches to create shadow and depth. Mrs. Morrison approached, probably to tell them to leave. She stopped dead when she saw the embroidery, picked up the linen, held it to the light. This is... She trailed off, turned the fabric to see the back. The reverse was as perfect as the front. No loose threads, no knots showing. Where did you learn this? Clara wrote on a piece of paper she'd brought. Your cousin taught basics. Rest I learned from books. Books? Mrs. Morrison's eyebrows went up. You learned this from books. Clara nodded, took the linen back, kept working. She added a butterfly near the rose, wings so delicate they seemed to flutter. Other women had gathered now, drawn by Mrs. Morrison's interest. Mrs. Johnson pushed to the front. Is that French knots, but they're so small. Clara looked up, saw her audience. She set down the rose linen, picked up another scrap. This time she embroidered a small bird in flight. 5 minutes, maybe less. The bird looked ready to sing. I need a wedding dress for my daughter, Mrs. Johnson said suddenly. Next month. Could you...
Clara held up one finger, then wrote, see my other work first. She pulled out another bundle from that mysterious hiding place in her dress, unfolded it careful. It was a collar, the kind that could be added to a plain dress to make it fancy. But this wasn't just any collar. It was art. Vines and flowers intertwined, with tiny seed pearls sewn in to look like morning dew. The edge was finished with the finest scalloping Tom had ever seen. My lord, someone whispered Mrs. Brady. Tom thought, that's finer than anything in San Francisco. How much? Mrs. Johnson asked. Clara wrote, wedding dress, full embroidery, $25. Several women gasped. That was 3 months' wages for some folks. That's robbery, Mrs. Pritchard said. Clara shrugged, started packing up her samples. Mrs. Johnson caught her hand. Wait, can I see it when it's done, before I pay? Clara nodded, wrote, half now, half when done. Deal. Mrs. Johnson opened her purse right there, counted out $12.50. When can you start? Clara pointed at the door, then made a walking motion. Today. She'd start today.
More women pressed forward. I need a christening gown. My husband tore his good coat. Could you teach my daughter? Clara wrote prices, names, took orders. Tom kept track in his head. $5 for the christening gown, $3 for mending, $2 for teaching. In 10 minutes, she'd lined up $30 of work. But they needed $150. Sheriff Daniels appeared at Tom's elbow. Miller needs help with harvest. $1.50 a day if you work Sundays too. Tom's chest loosened a little. $21 if he worked every day. Still not enough.
I need someone to fix my roof, Dr. Morrison said. That storm damaged the surgery. $5 if you can do it this week. My fence is down, another man added. $2 to fix it. Tom nodded to each offer, adding in his head. With Clara's 30 and his maybe 35, they had 65, still 85 short. The crowd shifted, and Tom saw something that made his throat close up. Clara had moved to another table, was sketching on brown paper with charcoal. Women surrounded her, pointing at the drawings, making suggestions. She was designing dresses, right there, creating patterns from nothing but imagination and charcoal. That neckline, young Mrs. Mitchell said. Could you make it higher? Clara adjusted the sketch with a few quick strokes. The dress transformed from evening wear to church appropriate, but kept its elegance. How much for that one? Clara wrote. $15. I'll take it. More orders. A riding dress for Miss Carter. A Sunday dress for Mrs. Lopez. Each one different. Each one perfectly suited to the woman ordering it. Clara wasn't just sewing. She was making each woman feel beautiful, special, seen. Tom counted again. With all the orders, Clara might make $60. Might. If she could do all that work in 2 weeks. If the women actually paid. If nothing went wrong. Reverend Walsh approached through the crowd. Miss Hartley. He said slow so she could read his lips. Then he signed something with his hands. Clara's eyes went wide. She signed back, tentative at first. Then, with growing confidence. You know sign language, Tom asked. Learned it during the war. The Reverend said, There was a soldier. He trailed off, lost in some memory. Then shook his head, focused on Clara again. His hands moved quick, and Clara laughed, actually laughed. A sound Tom had never heard from her before. It was rusty, unpracticed, but real. What did you say? Tom asked. I asked if she'd teach sign language after church services, to anyone who wants to learn. The Reverend smiled. The church would pay $5 a week, $5 a week, 2 weeks, $10 more. They were up to maybe 105, still 45 short. Clara signed something to the Reverend. He translated, She says she'll do it for free if people really want to learn. The church will pay, the Reverend said firmly. Good work deserves good wages. The social was winding down. Families gathered their dishes, their children. Clara had a list of names, measurements, orders. Her fingers were already red from demonstrating stitches, showing techniques. As they walked to the horses, Tom felt someone watching. He turned to see Thornton's carriage parked across the street. The man himself stood beside it, that smooth face expressionless. He'd been watching the whole time, seeing how hard they were scrambling, knowing they couldn't make it. Clara saw him too. Her hand tightened on Tom's arm. She walked straight toward Thornton, pulling Tom with her. Miss Hartley, Thornton said, touching his hat brim. Quite a performance in there. Clara's jaw tightened. She pulled out her paper, wrote, not performance, work. Work. Thornton smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. Let me make this easier. I'll give you $170 for the land right now. You walk away with $20 profit. No more scrambling. Clara shook her head. $175. Another headshake. You can't make $300 in 2 weeks. Thornton said, It's impossible. Clara wrote one word. Watch. They left him standing there. But Tom could feel those eyes following them all the way home. That evening, Clara spread everything out on the table. The list of orders, the measurements, the sketches. She wrote numbers, added them up. $73 in sewing work. If she could do it all,
$10 for teaching. Tom's harvest and repair work might bring $40. $123. Still 27 short. Clara stared at those numbers until her eyes went red. Then she wrote something else. Wedding. Tom frowned. What about it? She wrote, if we marry, I can take in washing. Respectable women do washing. Washing paid maybe 50 cents a day. Not enough. Clara stood, paced the small room, stopped at the window, outside. Their pathetic garden plot waited. The seeds Tom's mother had saved still sat on the windowsill. She turned, wrote, what if baby clothes? Before Tom could ask what she meant, Clara was sketching again. Tiny gowns, booties, blankets, baby things, but special, the kind of things a mother would treasure forever. Every woman wants beautiful things for babies, she wrote. Even poor women. It might work. Baby clothes used less fabric, could be made faster, but they'd need materials, and they had no money for supplies. That's when Clara did something that made Tom's breath catch. She walked to where her good dress should have hung, the one lost in the flood. From that same corner, she pulled out one more hidden bundle, opened it. White fabric, fine cotton, almost silk, maybe 2 yards. Where? She wrote, saved 3 years for wedding dress. Tom's hands looked like raw meat. 14 days of cutting wheat under sun that baked the earth hard as iron. The scythe handle was slick with blood from burst blisters. Miller stood at the field's edge, counting bushels. $1.50, Miller said, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. Same as yesterday. Tom pocketed the coins. His shirt, mended 3 times now by Clara's quick fingers, tore again at the shoulder as he shouldered his tools. No time to care. Tomorrow was the deadline. The walk back to the Fuller place took longer each day. Tom's boots had worn through at the sole. He could feel every rock, every thorn, when he finally saw the house. A single candle flickered in the window. Clara, still working. She sat hunched over white fabric, needle flying. The Johnson wedding dress spread across the table like fresh snow. Every inch was covered with embroidery so fine it hurt to look at. Tiny roses climbed the bodice, vines twisted down the sleeves. At the hem, Clara had created a garden flowers so real Tom wanted to smell them. Her right eye twitched, the way it did when she'd been sewing too long. A spot of blood marked the white silk where she'd pricked her finger. She rubbed salt on it quick, the blood lifting clean. Tom had watched her do that same thing 7 times in as many days. On the floor beside her, wrapped in brown paper, sat the other finished work. 3 baby christening gowns, 5 ladies' dresses, 2 men's coats, mended so well you couldn't find the tears. A riding habit for Miss Carter that made her look like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Clara looked up when Tom's shadow fell across her work. Her face was thinner than 2 weeks ago. Dark circles under her eyes looked painted on, but she smiled small, tired, but real, and held up the dress. Perfect. Every stitch invisible, every line clean. Mrs. Johnson had already seen it once, had actually cried when Clara showed her the half-finished bodice. Tomorrow she'd pay the rest. $12.50. Tom emptied his pockets onto the table. $1.50 from today, added to the jar where they'd been collecting everything. Clara had written the running total on the wall, $173, still 27 short. Clara stood, swayed. Tom caught her arm. When did she get so thin she'd been giving him the bigger portion of their meager meals? He realized, making sure he had strength for the fields while she lived on coffee and determination. She pulled away, pointed at the other corner. More bundles. Tom hadn't noticed them in the dim light. Baby clothes, dozens of tiny gowns, booties, blankets, each one decorated with embroidery that turned simple cotton into something precious. Clara wrote on her slate, "Sold today, while you worked." How much? She added numbers on the slate. $15 for the baby clothes, $5 from Mrs. Brady for teaching her daughter basic stitches, $3 from mending the Reverend's vestments. Tom added it up. $196, 4 short. Clara's face crumpled, just for a second. Then she straightened, wrote, "Still have morning, A few hours to earn $4. It might as well be 400. Clara went back to the wedding dress, adding final touches. Tom sat beside her, holding candles close so she could see. His eyes burned from staying open. Her needle slipped. Blood spotted the hem. She rubbed salt, hands shaking. The blood stayed. She tried again. More salt, more rubbing. The stains spread. Clara's shoulders started shaking. No sound, she never made sound when she cried, but tears dropped onto the silk. Tom took the dress from her hands, gentle as handling eggs. Found the spot. It was tiny, hidden in the embroidery. Nobody would notice unless they knew to look. He wrote on the slate, "Perfect anyway." Clara shook her head hard, pointed at the stain, then at the price. Her meaning clear, imperfect work meant imperfect payment. Mrs. Johnson might dock the price. Even $1 less meant failure. They sat there in candlelight, staring at that tiny blood spot, all their work, all their suffering, undone by a drop of blood. The rooster crowed. Morning. Tom hadn't realized they'd sat there all night. Clara stood, washed her face in the basin, fixed her hair, put on her one remaining dress, the patched calico that had been through everything with them. She wrapped the wedding dress in clean paper, tied it with string she'd saved from something. They walked to town together, Tom carrying the dress. His legs felt like water. Clara stumbled twice. The second time, she didn't get up right away, just knelt there in the road, breathing hard. Tom pulled her up. They had 1 hour. The bank was already open. Thornton's carriage sat outside, the man himself visible through the window, waiting. Hutchins was there too, papers ready. They went to Mrs. Johnson's house first. The maid let them in, led them to the parlor. Mrs. Johnson and her daughter Emily were waiting, already dressed for the occasion, though the wedding wasn't until next month. Clara unwrapped the dress slow, careful, held it up. In the morning light through the tall windows, it was art. The embroidery caught the sun, seemed to glow. Emily gasped, actually pressed her hands to her mouth. "Oh, Mama." Mrs. Johnson walked around the dress, examining every seam, every stitch. Her fingers found the hem where the blood had been. Clara went rigid. Mrs. Johnson looked closer. The stain was still there, faint, worked into the embroidery pattern so it looked like a shadow on a rose petal. Intentional, beautiful. "This is extraordinary," Mrs. Johnson said. "Better than anything in Dallas or San Francisco." She opened her purse, counted out $12.50, then paused, added another $5. "For exceeding expectations," she said. Clara's hands shook as she took the money. $17.50 instead of $12.50. They had $201. They ran to the bank. Actually ran. Clara, holding her skirts up, Tom's boots slapping the boardwalk, burst through the door just as the courthouse clock started striking 9. Thornton looked up from his pocket watch. Cutting it close. Clara slammed their money on Hutchins' desk. The bills scattered. Hutchins counted slow, careful. 190, 195, 200, 201. "We agreed on 300, Thornton said. Tom's stomach dropped. 300. They'd been so focused on making the 200 to match Thornton's offer, plus the 150 Clara had put down. But Thornton was right. The deal was 300, not 200. Clara pulled out her deposit slip, showed it to Hutchins. 150 already paid, plus 201 today. 351 total. Thornton's face went red. "That's not..." He stopped. It was exactly what they'd agreed. 300 for the land. Hutchins pulled out the deed. "Mr. Thornton, they've met the terms." Thornton stood, looked at Clara, at Tom. "You won't last the winter. That land's worthless. You'll starve out there." Clara pulled out her slate, wrote, "Watch us." Thornton left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Hutchins counted out their extra $51, handed it back with the deed. "Congratulations. The land is yours." Tom signed. His broken hands shook, made the signature crooked. Clara signed next, neat and perfect. Clara Wade. She'd added Tom's name without asking, without discussing, just decided. They walked out holding the deed between them, legal owners of 20 acres of hard dirt and a broken house. But theirs. "Wait," Hutchins called from the door. "There's a recording fee, $1. Tom's chest tightened. Always something. Clara pulled out a silver $1 of the two she'd hidden in her boot that first day. Her emergency money, saved even from Tom. Hutchins took it, gave them a receipt, $50 left. Not much for starting a life. They stopped at the general store. Clara bought flour, beans, coffee, salt pork. Tom bought nails and tar paper for the roof. Clara added white thread. Tom knew what that meant. Her wedding dress. Finally. The ride home felt different. Buttercup seemed to know it too, stepping lighter despite her weariness. The Fuller place, their place, now looked different in the afternoon light. Still broken, still hard, but possible. Clara unpacked supplies while Tom tended the horse. When he came back in, she'd made biscuits. First hot food in 2 days. They ate slow, tasting every bite. The coffee was strong enough to float horseshoes, the way Tom liked it. Evening settled gentle. Clara pulled out plain white cotton, not the fine fabric she'd saved for years, that had gone into baby clothes to sell. This was simple, practical. She started cutting, pinning. A dress, but not fancy. The kind a woman would wear to marry a poor man and not be ashamed. Tom remembered something. Went to his coat. Pulled out the seed packets. His mother's seeds. Carried 5 years waiting for land worth planting. Set them on the table. Clara looked at them, then at him, smiled that rare, real smile. Tomorrow they'd plant. Tomorrow they'd start building something from nothing. Tom found his mother's Bible in his saddlebag, one of the few things that survived the flood. Inside the front cover, his mother had written family names, births, deaths, marriages. Tom took Clara's sewing charcoal, added a new line. Thomas Wade married Clara Hartley, September 1880, Willow Creek, Texas. Clara saw what he'd written, took the charcoal, added something. First child expected spring 1881. Tom stared at the words, looked at Clara. She placed her hand on her stomach, just for a moment. Too early to show. But she knew. Women always knew. Spring, when the seeds would sprout, when the world would turn green, when their family would grow. Clara went back to sewing her simple dress. Tom watched her work by candlelight, those clever fingers making something from nothing, same as always. Outside, wind rattled the walls. The raccoons settled in the attic. Their horse dozed in the lean-to they'd built. The deed lay on the table beside Tom's mother's seeds, their names written bold and legal. Tom Wade and Clara Wade. 20 acres of difficult land. A house more holes than walls. $50 to their name. Tom had never been richer. Clara finished a seam, looked up. Her hand moved in the sign the Reverend had taught them, both fingers to forehead, then to heart. "I love you," Tom signed back, clumsy but clear. They sat in their doorway watching stars come out. The desert had cooled. Coyotes called in the distance, answered by others. The land spread out before them, dry and difficult in theirs. Tomorrow they'd plant seeds. Tomorrow they'd start fixing the roof proper. Tomorrow they'd walk to town as married folks, respectable, worth knowing. But tonight, in their broken house on their hard-won land, they were already home. The raccoons chittered overhead. Clara leaned against Tom's shoulder. He felt her breathing, steady and sure. The candle burned low. Clara's wedding dress, half finished, waited on the table. Tom's mother's seeds sat on the windowsill, patient as always. The deed lay beside them. Proof that sometimes $4 silver could buy everything that mattered. Tom wrapped his arms around Clara from behind. She leaned back into him. No words needed. They'd learned to speak without sound. Love without words. Build without anything but will. The stars came out full, desert bright, and in the morning, they would plant, connecting hearts. Now that you've heard Tom and Clara's story, I need to tell you something. My granddaddy didn't just work alongside Tom Wade. Tom was his closest friend until the day he died. And Clara. She taught my grandmother to sign when nobody else would talk to a Mexican woman in that town. Their daughter, little Mary Wade, born spring of 1881, became my grandmother's dearest companion.
You see, Tom and Clara didn't just build a home from nothing. They built a bridge between worlds. Clara's hands spoke to those who'd listen. Tom's quiet strength showed that gentleness wasn't weakness. They proved that the richest folks aren't those with money, but those who choose each other when choosing seems impossible. Story note. This narrative was inspired by historical accounts of frontier charity auctions and marriages in 1880s Texas, created solely for entertainment purposes. This story does not condone, encourage, or promote any form of violence or harmful behavior. All characters and events depicted are products of the author's imagination. And any resemblance to real persons, living or deceased, or actual events is purely coincidental. The story aims to explore themes of human dignity, perseverance, and the triumph of love over prejudice.